Welcome back to the Leaderboard. Today we're taking a look at the life of Arthur Morgan, the primary protagonist in Red Dead Redemption 2. Make sure to like this video if you liked it and subscribe for more like this. Let's hop right in. Background: Arthur Morgan was born around 1863 to Beatrice and Lyle Morgan in the northern United States. Tragically, Arthur lost his mother during his childhood under mysterious circumstances. His father, Lyle, led a life of crime as a petty criminal and outlaw. When Arthur was just 11 years old in 1874, his father was apprehended for theft. Arthur experienced the heart-wrenching moment of his father's demise and, despite their tumultuous relationship, chose to honor his memory by wearing his hat and preserving a picture of him. Around 1877, Arthur, described as a wild delinquent, was discovered on the streets and taken under the wing of Dutch van der Linde and Hosea Matthews. Considering them as father figures, Arthur embraced Dutch's vision of living beyond societal boundaries and legal restrictions. Under their guidance, Arthur acquired essential skills such as literacy, hunting, combat, marksmanship, and horsemanship, becoming not only their first apprentice but also a founding member of the van der Linde gang. During this time, Arthur developed a close bond with a pet dog named Copper, with whom he shared baths and admired for its spirited nature. Despite challenges in controlling Copper, Arthur cherished their companionship deeply. Following Copper's passing, Arthur kept a memento of him on his wagon. Additionally, Arthur formed an attachment to a mare named Boadicea, although she had passed away before the gang reached Coulter. As a young man, Arthur encountered Mary Gillis, with whom he fell deeply in love and even became engaged. He formed a close bond with her younger brother Jamie, teaching him the art of horseback riding. However, Arthur's inclination towards a life of crime, combined with the strong disapproval of Mary's family, particularly her father, ultimately led to the dissolution of their relationship and their subsequent separation. In 1884, Arthur embarked on a fishing trip and proudly returned with 3 magnificent bass. The gang rejoiced with a grand feast in his honor, toasting him throughout the night. However, the following week it was discovered during a stroll with Dutch in the local market that Arthur had simply purchased the bass from a fishmonger, much to his embarrassment. In 1885, Arthur crossed paths with a 12-year-old boy named John Marston, whom Dutch had rescued from a lynching attempt by a group of Illinois homesteaders. John was welcomed into the gang, raised alongside Arthur, and the two became close as brothers. Under Dutch's guidance, they were instilled with anarchist ideals, opposing a corrupt government, and were taught that seeking revenge was a futile pursuit. Over time, Arthur and John earned the distinction of being Dutch's favored sons. In 1887, Arthur joined Dutch and Hosea in the gang's inaugural bank heist. At the stroke of 2 o'clock, they stormed into the Lee and Hoyt banking house, securing $5,000 in gold. Following the robbery, they remained in town, distributing money to the destitute in hovels, shanties, and orphanages, casting themselves as modern-day Robin Hood figures. It was after this daring exploit that Arthur found himself a wanted man. Years later, Arthur crossed paths with Eliza, a 19-year-old waitress with whom he had shared a night and subsequently fathered a son, Isaac. Despite Eliza's awareness of Arthur's tumultuous lifestyle, she welcomed whatever support he could provide for her and the child. Arthur, mindful not to make promises he couldn't keep, pledged to fulfill his responsibilities towards them. He made periodic visits to Eliza and Isaac, spending days with them. Arthur held fond memories of Isaac, remembering him as a good kid. Tragically, one fateful day, Arthur returned to find 2 crosses outside their home, indicating the devastating loss of both Eliza and Isaac. He learned they had been senselessly killed by robbers, all for the sake of $10. This harrowing event left Arthur emotionally hardened as he struggled to come to terms with the pain it wrought and gained insight into the grim realities of outlaw life, realizing that goodness doesn't always accompany such a path. In 1894, Abigail Roberts, a woman working as a prostitute, joined the van der Linde gang. Over time, she developed feelings for John Marston, ultimately becoming pregnant with their son, Jack. Arthur assumed a role akin to that of a surrogate uncle to Jack as he grew up. However, John shirked his responsibilities as a father, leading to his departure from the gang. When John returned approximately a year later, despite Dutch and most of the gang welcoming him back warmly, Arthur felt deeply betrayed by John's actions, resulting in a growing divide between them as the years passed. By 1898, the gang had made their way to Montana. During their stay, Hosea managed to catch several large salmon on a fishing excursion, intending to treat the entire camp to a feast. However, the festivities were abruptly halted when Copper, Arthur's beloved pet dog, consumed the fish and tragically passed away shortly after. Following a fire that resulted in the loss of Arthur's old journal and encountering trouble up north, the gang decided to travel south and east, taking a deliberate and arduous route through the northern grizzlies to throw off any potential pursuers. They spent several months in the wilderness, predominantly sticking to the western foothills of the mountain during the winter. While traversing the grizzlies, the gang expanded its ranks by recruiting new members. Among them were Lenny Summers, a young teenager, and Charles Smith, a drifting outlaw. Arthur formed favorable opinions of both individuals, eventually forming strong bonds with them. Additionally, the gang encountered Jenny Kirk, a young woman left abandoned by the roadside who was subsequently welcomed into their fold. The most recent addition to the gang was Micah Bell, a volatile career outlaw who had saved Dutch's life during a shootout. Despite Dutch's favorable disposition towards Micah, Arthur openly harbored disdain for him due to his volatile nature and tendencies. By the spring of 1899, the Vanderlinde gang had reached West Elizabeth and opted to conceal themselves in plain sight just outside the burgeoning industrial town of Blackwater. Various schemes were in motion within the gang, with Arthur and Hosea devising a substantial real estate swindle among them. However, Dutch was also orchestrating a grand plan, with the assistance of Micah, to stage a lucrative robbery of a ferry carrying valuable cargo bound for the town. Despite Dutch's confidence in the plan, both Hosea and Arthur harbored reservations. Dutch's vision entailed executing the heist before fleeing westward, possibly into New Austin. Following the completion of Arthur and Hosea's scheme, they were to reunite with the gang the subsequent day. Regrettably, the ferry robbery did not unfold as anticipated. The gang found themselves ambushed by the Pinkertons during the course of the heist, leading to a violent clash now remembered as the Blackwater Massacre. Arthur and Hosea arrived belatedly, only to find the gang in dire straits. Numerous members were either slain or gravely wounded, prompting a frantic retreat northward into the mountains in a desperate bid to evade law enforcement. Arthur harbored suspicions that the entire heist might have been orchestrated as a trap. Events of Red Dead Redemption 2. Coulter Chapter. Following the failed ferry heist, Dutch and the gang are compelled to flee Blackwater, embarking on a perilous journey across the mountains in a bid to elude law enforcement. Shortly after seeking refuge in the deserted mining settlement of Coulter, Dutch and Arthur set out in search of either John Marston or Micah Bell, both of whom had ventured ahead for reconnaissance. Encountering Micah, they learn of a nearby homestead where a festive gathering seems to be underway. Seeking assistance, they approach the homestead only to confront members of the rival O'Driscoll gang. A confrontation ensues, resulting in the demise of the O'Driscolls. Following a thorough search of the ranch, they encounter Sadie Adler, a woman whose husband had fallen victim to the O'Driscolls. Moved by her plight, they escort her back to camp. Upon their return, Abigail Roberts implores Arthur to locate the missing John Marston. Teaming up with Javier Escuela, Arthur locates John, grievously injured and bearing scars from a wolf attack. They transport him back to camp where he begins his recuperation. Subsequently, Dutch devises a plan to ambush the nearby O'Driscoll camp based on intel obtained from an interrogated O'Driscoll at the homestead. The gang launches an assault on the camp, securing dynamite and intelligence regarding an impending train robbery targeting Leviticus Cornwall's assets. While journeying back to Coulter, they encounter a previously reprimanded O'Driscoll named Kieran, whom Arthur volunteers to capture. Successfully apprehending Kieran, they detain him in the stables, employing starvation as a means to extract vital information from him. In the wake of the gang's abrupt departure from Blackwater, provisions were scarce, prompting Arthur to embark on a hunting expedition with Charles Smith in search of sustenance. Charles, due to a hand injury sustained during the botched ferry heist, entrusts Arthur with a bow for the task. Amidst their hunt, they engage in an amicable conversation, reflecting on their shared experiences both within and beyond the gang, while Charles imparts hunting wisdom to Arthur. With Arthur's skill, they successfully procure 2 deer, ensuring an ample food supply for the gang upon their return to camp. To finance their escape from the mountainous terrain, Dutch orchestrates a robbery of the Cornwall train. However, a malfunctioning detonator necessitates a chase after the train. Arthur, Lenny, and Javier leap onto the train from above, encountering obstacles along the way. Though Javier falls and Lenny struggles, they persevere, with Arthur assisting Lenny back onto the carriage. Together, they confront and overcome the train's guards, seizing valuable state bonds from the private car. Dutch leaves Arthur to handle the fate of the surrendered guards, leaving the decision to the player's discretion. After resolving the situation, Arthur rides back to Coulter, the gang's temporary refuge. Horseshoe Overlook Chapter. After the snow thaws, the gang relocates from the mountains to a new spot in the Heartlands, situated near the town of Valentine. Arthur visits the local saloon, encountering Javier, Charles, and later Bill. A brawl erupts when Bill instigates a fight while intoxicated. Amidst the chaos, Arthur faces off against a formidable opponent named Tommy, who eventually hurls him through the saloon window onto the muddy street outside. Despite the initial setback, Arthur ultimately emerges victorious after a fierce struggle, ceasing his assault at the plea of Thomas Downs. Afterward, Dutch summons Arthur and reunites him with Josiah Trelawney, revealing Sean Maguire's survival and formulating plans for his rescue. Arthur joins Trelawney, Charles, and Javier on the mission, engaging in a frontal assault during the rescue operation where Charles provides reconnaissance from a distance. Following a bloody skirmish with bounty hunters, Sean is successfully rescued, prompting a jubilant celebration upon their return to camp. Additionally, Arthur embarks on a bear hunting expedition with Hosea, during which Hosea presents him with a raven black Shire horse. Arthur has the option to either keep or sell the horse at the stables in Valentine. Journeying to Grizzly's East in pursuit of the elusive 1,000-pound bear, they set bait and await its arrival. When the bear attacks, Arthur intervenes to save Hosea's life, earning gratitude from his companion. As a token of appreciation, Hosea provides Arthur with a map, detailing the locations of legendary animals. Subsequently, they can either part ways or return to camp together. Arthur takes charge of interrogating the O'Driscoll captive held by the gang in the mountains. Dutch summons Bill to enforce a gruesome threat, castrating Kieran with scalding tongs, unless he discloses Colm O'Driscoll's whereabouts. Under duress, Kieran reveals that Colm is at 6 Point Cabin. Accompanied by Arthur, John, and Bill, they embark on a stealthy approach to the hideout, dispatching several O'Driscolls before a violent confrontation. Inside a cabin, Arthur faces imminent danger from an O'Driscoll assailant, only to be saved by Kieran's timely intervention. Despite Kieran's rescue, Arthur remains skeptical and confronts him, suspecting betrayal. However, Kieran's defense, coupled with persuasion from John and Bill, earns him a reprieve, allowing him to remain within the gang. Meanwhile, amidst the unfolding events, Arthur may engage in buffalo hunting with Charles. Additionally, he has the opportunity to join Javier in robbing Shays Porter's homestead. Subsequently, Arthur receives a letter from Mary Linton, urging him to meet her. Upon reading the letter, he's tasked by Leopold Strauss to collect a debt from rancher Thomas Downs. Confronting Thomas at Downs Ranch, Arthur resorts to violence when met with resistance, only to be confronted by Thomas's destitute condition and his wife's plea for mercy. Arthur departs the ranch, grappling with his actions. Later, he meets Mary, who reveals her brother Jamie's entanglement with a peculiar cult, the Chelonians. Arthur agrees to assist her, leading to a confrontation with the cult near Cumberland Forest. In a tense encounter, Arthur prevents Jamie from harming himself, ultimately returning him to Mary's care. Upon returning from a reconnaissance mission, Lenny Summers appraises Arthur and Dutch of Micah's involvement in a deadly skirmish in Strawberry, where he killed 2 O'Driscolls while intoxicated, leading to his arrest. Concerned for Micah's welfare, Arthur takes Lenny to Valentine for a drink and to soothe his nerves, inadvertently getting heavily intoxicated in the process. Once sober, Arthur sets off for Strawberry to rescue Micah. However, the sheriff adamantly refuses to release him, prompting Arthur to take matters into his own hands by forcibly breaking open the cell bars. A confrontation ensues, resulting in Micah swiftly dispatching his O'Driscoll cellmate. Urging Micah to flee, Arthur is met with resistance as Micah insists on retrieving his prized revolvers from a nearby residence. In their escape, they engage in a violent standoff with law enforcement, culminating in Micah's acquisition of his coveted weapons. However, Arthur chastises Micah for his reckless behavior and unnecessary violence, prompting Micah to seek redemption through a robbery. Subsequently, Arthur fulfills his promise to meet Micah, and they embark on a stagecoach robbery based on information divulged by Micah's O'Driscoll cellmate. Amidst the heist, they face a counterattack from the O'Driscolls, leading to a fierce battle across a river. Despite their adversaries' attempts, Arthur and Micah emerge victorious, securing the stolen funds. Later, Abigail requests Arthur's company to take Jack Marston fishing at the Dakota River. During their outing, they encounter Andrew Milton and Edgar Ross, agents of the Pinkerton National Defense Agency, who disclose the demise of Mac Callender. Milton proposes a deal, offering Arthur clemency in exchange for betraying Dutch. Incensed by the proposition, Arthur staunchly refuses and escorts Jack back to camp following the agent's departure. Upon receiving intel from John about an upcoming train passing through Valentine, Arthur devises a plan to halt the train by pilfering a stagecoach laden with Cornwall oil. Executing the plan, Arthur, alongside Sean, Charles, and John, intercepts the stagecoach and positions it in front of the oncoming train, forcing it to halt. Boarding the train, they initiate the heist, with Charles handling the engineer, John retrieving the loot, and Arthur providing persuasive tactics to coax compliance from reluctant passengers. Amidst the chaos, Arthur searches for Sean, only to discover him entangled in a scuffle with a guard, whom Arthur dispatches. However, the heist is abruptly curtailed as law enforcement closes in, prompting the gang to flee, narrowly evading capture. Convinced of the need for additional funds, John informs Arthur of an opportunity involving a herd of sheep. Equipped with a sniper rifle, Arthur and John descend upon the ranch hands from a hilltop, prompting chaos. Herding the sheep to auction, they negotiate with the auctioneer, striking a deal to share profits in exchange for his silence. With the agreement settled, they reconvene at a local saloon, where they encounter Strauss and Dutch. However, their meeting is interrupted as Leviticus Cornwall and his henchmen capture Strauss and John. Engaging in a daring rescue mission, Dutch and Arthur liberate their comrades before making a harrowing escape back to camp. Recognizing the need to relocate, Dutch dispatches Arthur and Charles to scout Dewberry Creek, a potential campsite suggested by Micah. However, they stumble upon a German family with the father missing. Charles tracks the father to Clemens Point, where they confront the bandits and successfully reunite the family. Arthur escorts them back, while Charles diverts the caravan to Clemens Point, a superior campsite. Clemens Point Chapter. Following their relocation to the new campsite, Hosea, Arthur, and Dutch embark on a ride, encountering Sheriff Lee Gray, who has apprehended Trelawney for engaging in illicit gold prospecting. Arthur aids in the capture of escaped outlaws, prompting Trelawney's release. Impressed by their assistance, Sheriff Gray deputizes Arthur, Dutch, and Bill Williamson to tackle a moonshine operation run by the Lemoyne Raiders. Teaming up with Deputy Archibald McGregor, they successfully dismantle the operation, earning a commendation from the sheriff. Dutch tasks Arthur with gathering intelligence on the Gray family at Caliga Hall. There he meets Beau Gray, who requests Arthur's aid in delivering a letter to his clandestine lover, Penelope Braithwaite, at Braithwaite Manor. After delivering the letter, Penelope entrusts Arthur with a reply, revealing her intention to attend a women's suffrage rally. Alarmed by this revelation, Beau implores Arthur to intervene, offering compensation for his assistance in safeguarding Penelope. Arthur and Beau intercept the carriage carrying the protesters, but their attempts to dissuade Penelope prove futile. Tasked with protecting her, Arthur drives the carriage as per Penelope's wishes, eventually ensuring her safety and escorting Beau away from his hostile relatives. Beau compensates Arthur for his services before Arthur returns to camp. As Dutch grows increasingly anxious about Trelawney's sudden disappearance, he tasks Arthur and Charles with locating him. They discover his abandoned caravan, marked by bloodstains and signs of a hasty departure. Following his trail, they stumble upon a makeshift campsite, where they uncover remnants of Trelawney's belongings. Their investigation is abruptly interrupted when they're ambushed by two bounty hunters. Despite the surprise attack, Arthur and Charles swiftly overpower their assailants and extract information regarding Trelawney's whereabouts. Learning that he's held captive at a nearby farmhouse, they rush to his rescue, engaging in a fierce confrontation with the bounty hunters. Pursuing the fleeing adversaries from a tobacco field, they eliminate the remaining threats and successfully retrieve Trelawney, who reassures them of his resilience. Subsequently, Uncle presents Arthur with an opportunity to partake in a stagecoach robbery alongside Charles and Bill. Accepting the proposition, they initiate the heist, only to realize that the stagecoach belongs to Cornwall, who has enlisted a formidable contingent of mercenaries for protection. Forced to seek refuge in a nearby barn, they find themselves trapped as the hired guns set the structure ablaze while launching an assault. Escaping the inferno, they engage in a desperate skirmish with Cornwall's men before finally fleeing to the safety of the forest, narrowly evading capture as they make their way back to camp. Shortly thereafter, Lenny approaches Arthur, divulging intelligence gathered from conversations with the black community in Rhodes, indicating that the Lemoyne Raiders possess a substantial cache of military-grade weapons. Arthur agrees to orchestrate a robbery of the Raiders, and accompanied by Lenny, sets out to the location specified by Lenny's contacts. Observing a coach passing by, they discreetly tail it until reaching Shady Bell. Launching an assault on the manor, they eliminate the Lemoyne Raiders stationed there and abscond with the coach. Despite encountering resistance from other raiders attempting to intercept them, Arthur and Lenny emerge victorious. Upon returning to camp, Arthur claims a bolt-action rifle from the spoils and resolves to sell the remaining weapons to bolster the camp's finances. Additionally, Arthur engages in various heists alongside fellow gang members, such as robbing a homestead with Sean, participating in stagecoach robberies with Sean and Mary Beth, and another with Bill and Tilly. In between, he finds time for recreational activities like fishing with Kieran and later with Javier. In quick succession, Bill and Karen Jones present a proposal to Arthur and Lenny, outlining plans to rob the Valentine Bank, for which they already gathered information. Despite initial reluctance, Arthur eventually acquiesces, and the quartet rides to Valentine. Karen assumes the guise of a lost girl or a harlot to distract the guard, enabling the group to incapacitate him. Arthur then faces the choice of either using dynamite to force open the safes or employing a more covert approach to crack them. Amidst their escape, they come under attack by law enforcement, but the gang members successfully fend them off and secure their getaway. Subsequently, Arthur heads down to Downs' ranch and collects the money owed by Edith Downs' husband. At a certain juncture, the gang receives word of a truce meeting planned by the O'Driscolls for Dutch and Colm. Despite Hosea's immediate suspicion of it being a trap, Dutch, persuaded by Micah, agrees to investigate. Arthur, also wary of the situation, accompanies them. Assigned as a sniper overlooking the meeting, Arthur is unexpectedly captured by the O'Driscolls and imprisoned in their hideout, sustaining a gunshot wound to the shoulder. Colm discloses their intention to use Arthur as bait to lure Dutch, intending to hand him over to the Pinkertons. After Colm's departure, Arthur cauterizes his wound and stages a daring escape back to camp, where he takes several weeks to recuperate. The gang resolves to replenish their funds by targeting both the Braithwaites and the Greys. Arthur first teams up with Sean to set fire to the Greys' tobacco fields using moonshine, securing a generous payment from the Braithwaites in exchange. Later, accompanied by John and Javier, Arthur embarks on a mission to steal the Braithwaite family's prized horses. Despite Tavish Gray's assurance of a lucrative payout for the horses, their actual worth turns out to be far less than expected, leaving the gang disappointed. Prompted by the Greys to rendezvous in Rhodes for a potential job, Bill, Micah, and Sean head there, soon joined by Arthur. However, the meeting proves to be an ambush, resulting in Sean's immediate death and Bill's capture by the sheriff. Arthur and Micah swiftly engage in a confrontation with Sheriff Gray and his deputies, ultimately emerging victorious after a fierce exchange of gunfire. Expressing his grief over Sean's death, Arthur implores Bill to ensure a proper burial for their fallen comrade. Upon his return to camp, Arthur learns of Jack's abduction by the Braithwaites as retaliation for horse theft. Mobilizing a sizable posse, the gang launches an assault on Braithwaite Manor, engaging in a protracted skirmish before apprehending Catherine Braithwaite. Despite her obstinance in disclosing Jack's whereabouts, they resort to drastic measures, setting the manor ablaze. Under duress, Catherine divulges her son's handed Jack over to Angelo Bronte, an Italian mobster residing in Saint Denis, before retreating into the engulfed residence as the gang departs. Shortly after their return to camp, agents Milton and Ross appear, presenting Dutch with an ultimatum to surrender himself in exchange for the pardoning and safe passage of the rest of the gang. Dutch rebuffs the offer, prompting Milton to depart with a vow to return accompanied by 50 men. With impending danger looming, the gang hastily prepares to relocate to Shady Belle, a location previously cleared of Lemoyne raiders by Lenny and Arthur. Tasked with scouting the area, John and Arthur eliminate the remaining raiders to secure the new hideout for the gang's habitation. Saint Denis chapter. Following their relocation to Shady Belle, John, Dutch, and Arthur embark on a mission to locate Bronte's residence in Saint Denis. Arthur eventually discovers the whereabouts of Bronte's mansion near the river after pursuing a street urchin who pilfered from him. The trio confront Bronte at his abode, nearly sparking a confrontation with his men before brokering a deal. In exchange for Jack's return, John and Arthur agree to handle a group of grave robbers. Venturing to the graveyard, they're ambushed by the criminals but emerge victorious, seizing their loot before making a swift escape ahead of the law's arrival. Returning to Bronte with the spoils, he honors his end of the bargain by releasing Jack and extending Dutch an invitation to the mayor's soiree. At the mayor's party, Bill, Hosea, Arthur, and Dutch disperse to pursue various leads. Arthur eavesdrops on a servant discussing Leviticus Cornwall and, spurred on by Dutch, tails him. Subsequently, Arthur pilfers documents pertaining to Cornwall before making a discreet exit from the mansion to rendezvous with the gang. Despite Bill's frustration over the lack of substantial leads, Hosea reveals a few prospects, including a potential riverboat robbery featuring a high-stakes poker game and a heist at the Lemoyne National Bank. Upon learning about the riverboat lead, Trelawney orchestrates a plan to exploit it for their benefit. Using his connections, he manages to secure spots for Javier, Strauss, Arthur, and himself aboard the vessel, alongside befriending the dealer to manipulate the poker game. Javier assumes the role of a guard, blending in seamlessly while Strauss strategically positions himself within Arthur's line of sight. Arthur joins the poker table, facing off against Desmond Blythe and others, with Strauss's covert assistance in rigging the game. With calculated maneuvers, Arthur emerges victorious, leaving Blythe penniless. In a final wager, Blythe stakes his Rootlinger pocket watch, which Arthur accepts and wins. Prompted by the pit boss, Arthur and Javier ascend to the vault, where the Rootlinger is stored. However, their attempt to retrieve it takes a perilous turn when the pit boss brandishes a concealed weapon, leading to a lethal confrontation. Despite securing the loot, their escape is compromised by the guards' arrival, forcing a swift retreat. Reuniting with Strauss and Trelawney, they engage in a skirmish with the guards before leaping overboard and swimming to shore, where they divide the spoils among themselves. Later, Arthur seeks out Rains Fall, a Native American chief, and finds him in Saint Denis accompanied by his son, Eagle Flies. Rains Fall shares troubling news. The US Army intends to forcibly relocate their tribe from their ancestral lands. He proposes a solution to Arthur: steal crucial documents from the Cornwall refinery, potentially halting the tribe's displacement. Arthur agrees to the task and infiltrates the refinery by posing as a worker transporting goods. After coercing a man into surrendering the documents, he escapes, encountering resistance from guards. In a daring move, Eagle Flies creates a diversion with an explosion, enabling Arthur to eliminate the guards swiftly. Together they flee the scene, and Eagle Flies compensates Arthur for his efforts, expressing hope for the document's effectiveness. Back at camp, Susan informs Arthur of Tilly's abduction by the Foreman brothers, prompting immediate action. They locate a hideout and successfully rescue Tilly, proceeding to confront Anthony Foreman, the gang's leader. Upon capturing him, Arthur faces a pivotal decision: to either execute Foreman as Susan urges or spare him as Tilly advocates. Regardless of the choice made, Tilly is assured protection from any further harassment by the Foreman brothers. Sadie approaches Arthur, expressing concern for Kieran's sudden disappearance. Before they can fully discuss the matter, Kieran's decapitated body is discovered near camp, prompting an attack by the O'Driscolls. The gang initially defends themselves at the road, but is eventually forced to seek refuge inside the plantation house. Dutch realizes that Sadie is outside, valiantly battling their assailants. Arthur rushes to her aid, eliminating their attackers, but Sadie refuses to retreat, intent on avenging her husband's death. Together they engage the enemy, driving the O'Driscolls into retreat. During this period, Arthur can participate in various activities, including joining Micah in a stagecoach robbery with Bill. He also has the option to accompany Lenny in another stagecoach heist, although this endeavor turns out to be a trap. Additionally, Arthur can engage in cattle rustling with Uncle. Following the chaos, Dutch summons Arthur and Lenny for a heist at the Saint-Denis trolley station, based on information from Angelo Bronte. They successfully infiltrate the station, holding the clerks at gunpoint, but discover only a meager sum of $90 in the vault. As they attempt to flee, law enforcement presence intensifies. Boarding a trolley, they navigate through the city center until the vehicle crashes, forcing them into a confrontation with pursuing policemen. After commandeering a stagecoach, they escape to safety. Dutch acknowledges Lenny's role in their escape, and Arthur distributes $15 to each of them as acknowledgement. Afterward, Mary reaches out to Arthur, requesting a meeting in Saint-Denis. Upon their rendezvous, she confides in Arthur about her growing concerns regarding her father's escalating indulgence in vices like drinking, gambling, and frequenting brothels. Mary's interaction with her father turns tense as he abruptly leaves the scene. To ascertain his activities, Mary and Arthur covertly follow him, witnessing his intoxicated state and a subsequent encounter with Ashton, to whom Mr. Gillis sells a brooch. Recognizing the brooch as a cherished family heirloom from her mother, Mary confronts her father, while Arthur pursues Ashton to retrieve the item. After reclaiming the brooch, Arthur presents it to Mary and inquires about her father's whereabouts. Mary, disillusioned and indifferent, expresses her uncertainty and lack of concern for his actions. She then extends an invitation for Arthur to accompany her to the theater, leaving the decision to him. Following the theater outing, Mary proposes eloping with Arthur, but he declines, citing his status as a wanted fugitive, which would only endanger her, and his responsibilities to his companions. Recognizing the irreconcilable divide between their lifestyles, Mary bids farewell and they part ways. Returning to camp, Dutch summons Arthur to the balcony, expressing his dilemma of conflicting opinions with Hosea regarding their next move. Dutch advocates for extracting revenge on Angelo Bronte for deceiving them, believing it would facilitate robbing the bank. In contrast, Hosea deems the plan reckless and hazardous. Arthur aligns himself with Dutch, prompting them to travel to Lagos to negotiate with a fisherman named Thomas. Dutch strikes a deal with Thomas, offering assistance in locating his missing assistants in exchange for transportation to Bronte's mansion. Together they locate the assistants in the swamp, but their journey back to Lagos is interrupted by a colossal alligator attack. Despite rescuing the young man and fending off the alligator, they eventually return. Upon Arthur's return to Lagos, the gang boards Thomas's boat, embarking toward Angelo Bronte's estate. Upon arrival, they come under gunfire, prompting a fierce gunfight with the guards in the courtyard. Despite facing reinforcements, the gang secures the area and breaches the mansion's entrance. Arthur, breaking the lock, leads the charge, clearing rooms as they advance. While upstairs, Arthur encounters a surprise attack from Bronte himself. After subduing Bronte, Arthur escorts him downstairs, intending to retreat to the boat. However, the sound of gunfire attracts law enforcement, compelling the gang to fight their way back. Once aboard, they set course for Lagos, planning to ransom Bronte. However, Bronte suspects the gang's betrayal and offers a bounty for Dutch's head. Faced with no takers, Bronte insults Dutch, provoking Dutch to respond by drowning him and disposing of his body, shocking the rest of the gang. Back at camp, Dutch and Hosea finalize the blueprint for the Saint-Denis bank heist. The gang prepares and sets out the following morning. During the journey, Dutch meticulously explains the strategy. Hosea and Abigail will orchestrate a diversion to draw law enforcement away from the bank, while the remainder of the gang will enter through the front doors. Once inside, Arthur takes charge of looting the safe. Suddenly, the Pinkertons arrive, encircling the bank entirely. Agent Milton demands surrender, holding Hosea captive. Despite Dutch's plans for negotiation, Milton fatally shoots Hosea in the chest. In response, the gang launches a full-scale assault against the Pinkertons, triggering a chaotic shootout. Dutch orders Arthur to use dynamite to blast a hole in the bank's side, providing an escape route. After creating the opening, Arthur ascends to the rooftop, providing cover fire for the gang's escape. However, John is apprehended by the Pinkertons, and as the group attempts to flee across the roof, Lenny falls victim to Pinkerton gunfire. Arthur takes a moment to mourn his fallen comrade. The gang seeks refuge in an abandoned building until nightfall, then proceeds to the docks in hopes of finding a boat to escape. Unfortunately, heavy police surveillance impedes their progress. Charles creates a diversion, allowing the gang to reach the dock. They board a ship bound for Cuba, but tragedy strikes as the vessel sinks, separating Arthur from the rest of the gang. Guarma Chapter. Arthur wakes up on the shores of Guarma and begins to search for civilization. Eventually, he stumbles upon the gang gathered around a campfire, but their reunion is abruptly interrupted by the arrival of the local military forces. The soldiers arrest the gang, shackling them and escorting them towards jail. Along the way, rebels launch an attack on the soldiers, creating chaos. Taking advantage of the confusion, Arthur retrieves keys from a fallen soldier and uses them to free himself and his companions. After dispatching the guards, Hercule Fontaine, the leader of the rebels, urges the gang to follow him to safety. During their escape, Javier is wounded in the leg by enemy reinforcements, forcing them to leave him behind. Despite this setback, Hercule leads the remaining gang members to a rebel outpost stocked with weapons. They successfully fend off the incoming reinforcements, securing the outpost before proceeding to a church converted into a rebel stronghold, known as La Capilla. Upon reaching La Capilla, Arthur takes a brief rest before strategizing a plan to leave the island. One of his actions involves joining Dutch in a mission to rescue Javier. They venture into a cave where they encounter an elderly woman named Gloria. Dutch promises her a gold ingot to guide them through the cave to a ladder leading up to Aguas Dulces. However, Gloria demands more payment, leading to a confrontation where Dutch ends up killing her, much to Arthur's dismay. As they arrive, they witness Colonel Fusser and his soldiers mistreating Javier. In a bid to create a diversion, Dutch sabotages a sugar refinery, sparking chaos that allows him to rescue Javier. After fleeing the settlement, they reach the Arroyo de la Vibora River, where Arthur holds off waves of enemies while Dutch and Javier make their escape. Arthur investigates the disappearance of a group of workers but ends up being captured and imprisoned along two other rebels. When a guard approaches, intending to harm him, Arthur retaliates by swiftly dispatching the guard. Together with another rebel, they stealthily navigate through the camp, rescuing 3 men from execution and defeating the soldiers. After this, Arthur accompanies the gang to Cinco Torres. They witness a Cuban warship approaching while enemies swarm the area. From an elevated position, the gang, led by Hercule, Dutch, and Arthur, engages in combat until they reach the fort. They clear out the soldiers, preparing to seize the fort, and then return to the top of Cinco Torres to man the cannon against the approaching warship. After numerous shots, they succeed in sinking the warship and begin planning their escape from the island. As they prepare to depart, they encounter a gun battery blocking their way. Understanding that it must be silenced, the gang launches an assault on the battery, with Arthur destroying the cannons. They fight their way to the ship, where Arthur confronts Levi Simon at gunpoint, only for Dutch to intervene. A tense standoff ensues, resolved when Arthur provides the ship captain with a rifle, allowing him to shoot Simon. Fusser, the antagonist, flees the scene, leading to a final showdown where Arthur demolishes the tower occupied by him, ultimately killing him and enabling the gang to finally leave the island. Arthur arrives at the Van Horn trading post and steals a horse to return to Shady Belle, only to find it abandoned upon arrival. However, he discovers a letter addressed to Caroline, indicating that the gang has relocated to Lakay. As he prepares to depart, Pinkertons arrive, prompting Arthur to either sneak away unnoticed or engage in a confrontation. Regardless of his choice, he heads straight to Lakay, where he reunites with the gang members who weren't stranded on Guarma. Abigail informs him of John's imprisonment at Sisika Penitentiary before the rest of the gang arrives. However, their reunion is abruptly interrupted by Agent Milton and his Pinkerton agents, who launch an attack on the camp. With Sadie and Bill's assistance, they fend off the attack using the Gatling gun. Afterwards, Sadie requests a meeting with Arthur and Saint-Denis to strategize about rescuing John from prison. Dutch tasks Arthur with clearing out an old hideout known as Beaver Hollow, inhabited by a group of cannibals called the Murphy Brood. Arthur brings Charles along, exchanging stories about their recent experiences, Arthur recounting his time in Guarma, while Charles discusses the scramble to reach Lakay. Eventually, they reach Beaver Hollow, whether by canoe or horseback. They stealthily navigate through the camp, eliminating enemies silently until the alarm is raised. They then launch a full-scale assault, eliminating all opposition. Amidst the chaos, they rescue a young girl named Meredith, who had been held captive and tortured by the Brood. Arthur escorts her back to her mother in Annisburg before returning to the Hollow, where the rest of the gang awaits. In a drunken stupor, Molly confesses to being the informant who tipped off the Pinkertons about the Saint-Denis bank robbery. Susan swiftly ends her revelation by dispatching her with a shotgun, leaving the gang in shock. Beaver Hollow Chapter. If Arthur has high honor. During his time in Annisburg, Arthur notices Edith Downs, the wife of Thomas Downs, from whom he contracted tuberculosis. Approaching her, he is met with her anger, blaming him for her husband's death and her son's laboring in the mines. Overwhelmed with guilt, Arthur decides to intervene. He retrieves Archie from the mines and provides them with financial assistance to start anew. Despite his efforts, Edith is reluctant to leave and persists in engaging in prostitution to support her family. Determined to help, Arthur confronts her in the woods and eventually persuades her to depart from town. Arthur heads to Saint-Denis to rendezvous with Sadie, but is suddenly overtaken by a violent bout of coughing, causing him to collapse. A compassionate stranger aids him to a nearby clinic, where Dr. Joseph R. Barnes delivers the grim diagnosis: tuberculosis, a sickness acquired from Thomas Downs months earlier. The revelation strikes Arthur deeply, realizing the mortality it carries and prompting a profound transformation within him. Following his diagnosis, Arthur meets up with Sadie, who expresses her intention to verify John's presence at the prison before planning a rescue. To facilitate this, she arranges for Arthur to tour the prison via hot air balloon with the operator Arturo Bullard. Descending in a balloon, Arthur observes John working in the fields, but draws gunfire from a guard, compelling their hasty retreat. Upon returning to the mainland, Arthur witnesses Sadie being pursued by O'Driscolls and retaliates from the air. Tragically, Bullard falls victim to the O'Driscolls' bullets, leading to a crash landing. Arthur and Sadie then confront the attackers in a fierce shootout, emerging triumphant despite the intense violence. Arthur proceeds to the docks at Copperhead Landing, just a short distance from Sisika Penitentiary, to aid Sadie in orchestrating John's escape from prison. Despite Abigail's insistence on joining, Sadie and Arthur insist that her presence would only complicate matters further. Grudgingly, Abigail concedes, expressing gratitude for their efforts. Arthur and Sadie set sail, eventually docking along the island's shoreline. Scaling a watchtower overlooking the fields, they eliminate the guards stationed there before engaging and dispatching 2 more guards in the fields. They capture a guard named Milliken, who informs them that John is not on duty that day. Utilizing Milliken as leverage, they approach the fortress's main gate, demanding John's release in exchange for the guard. The exchange is made, and the trio flees the island, pursued closely by enemy guards. Dutch and Micah enlist Arthur's help in confronting Cornwall in Annisburg. They position themselves in the harbor, anticipating Cornwall's arrival. While Dutch awaits with Arthur, Micah tails one of Cornwall's aides. Upon overhearing Cornwall's conversation with the Pinkertons, Dutch reveals himself and demands $10,000, a boat, and safe passage from Cornwall. When Cornwall refuses, Dutch fatally shoots him in the chest. Pinkertons and hired guns descend upon the gang, prompting a fierce battle as they fight their way out of town. Amidst the chaos, Micah successfully pilfers documents from the Cornwall Company, which he and Dutch intend to use for future planning. Arthur eventually accompanies Sadie and Dutch to Saint-Denis to witness Colm's hanging. To avoid detection, Arthur and Dutch disguise themselves as police officers, while Sadie adopts the guise of a high society lady. Their plan is to minimize the risk of being recognized. Amidst the crowd, they spot 2 O'Driscolls and discern the presence of a sniper atop a nearby building. Arthur swiftly neutralizes the sniper threat, allowing Dutch and Sadie to capture the O'Driscolls. With no one left to intervene, Colm meets his fate at the gallows. Following Colm's execution, Sadie impulsively kills both O'Driscoll captives, triggering a violent shootout. Once the O'Driscolls are subdued, Dutch and Sadie make their way back to Beaver Hollow, with Arthur in tow. Subsequently, Arthur receives a letter from Mary, expressing her desire to sever ties with him as a means of moving forward. She conveys her remorse for their inability to be together and returns his wedding ring. Unbeknownst to Mary, Arthur is battling terminal tuberculosis, which will soon claim his life. The documents pilfered by Micah reveal a significant shipment of dynamite en route from Annisburg to Saint-Denis. In response, Bill and Arthur are dispatched to intercept the convoy and secure the explosives for the gang's use. They devise an ambush strategy at Van Horn Trading Post. Bill feigns drunkenness in the path of the road, while Arthur positions himself at a distance to serve as a sniper. As the stagecoach halts, the duo initiates an assault on the guards, seizing control of the carriage. Despite facing waves of hired guns in pursuit, they successfully repel the attackers and make their getaway. After ensuring their safety, Micah directs John to transport the dynamite to Bacchus Bridge, while Arthur is tasked with rendezvousing there later to assist in setting up the explosives. Additionally, Strauss assigns Arthur the responsibility of pursuing 2 debtors, J. John Weathers, a deserter from Fort Wallace, and Arthur Londonderry, a miner. Arthur's first target is Weathers, who proposes offering supplies from his wagon to settle his debt, only to be ambushed by soldiers seeking to apprehend him. Arthur is compelled to aid Weathers in defending the wagon, but unfortunately it's engulfed in flames by a lantern and destroyed during the skirmish. After dispatching the soldiers, Arthur observes Weathers departing with a Wapiti Indian woman, discerning the complexity of their situation. Weathers offers a locket in exchange for his debt, leaving Arthur to decide whether to accept it or forgive the debt outright. Subsequently, Arthur pursues Londonderry only to discover his demise. Upon locating the widow and her destitute son, Arthur faces the moral choice of either absolving the debt alone or offering additional financial assistance to Mrs. Londonderry for her sustenance. Returning to camp, Arthur's anger towards the suffering caused by Strauss boils over. He confronts Strauss, directing him to gather his belongings. Despite Strauss's confusion and attempts at reconciliation, Arthur remains resolute. He hurls money at Strauss's feet, commanding him to depart, a demand to which Strauss complies. Meeting with John at Bacchus Bridge, Arthur collaborates with him to sabotage the government supply route by detonating it. This risky venture nearly claims their lives as they narrowly escape an oncoming train. Following the explosion, John confides in Arthur about his concerns for his family amidst Dutch's deteriorating sanity. Arthur shares John's apprehensions, advising him to investigate further and report back. Eagle Flies arrives at Beaver Hollow, seeking the gang's assistance in reclaiming their confiscated horses from the army at Fort Wallace. Dutch, seizing the opportunity to strike at the government, agrees to help. Despite Arthur and Charles's apprehensions about Dutch's motives given his recent behavior changes, they join him. Together they journey eastward to hijack horses from a government ferry. After swimming to the boat, they stealthily subdue the guards and seize the horses before fleeing ashore. While Eagle Flies and Dutch return the horses to the reservation, Arthur departs to rendezvous with Rains Fall. Arriving at the reservation, Arthur encounters Rains Fall, who discerns his tuberculosis. Rains Fall suggests they search for medicinal herbs to alleviate Arthur's suffering. During their excursion, they encounter Captain Monroe seeking Arthur's assistance, to which Arthur agrees. After procuring the herbs, they visit a sacred site belonging to the Wapiti tribe, only to find it desecrated by the army. Realizing the army's culpability, Arthur covertly retrieves the stolen sacred items and returns them to Rains Fall, who expresses gratitude. Subsequently, they part ways and return to camp. Arthur rendezvous with Monroe, who reveals a child afflicted with smallpox due to Colonel Favors' obstruction of vaccine shipments. Incensed by this injustice, Arthur resolves to intercept the vaccine convoy. Pursuing the wagon transporting the vaccines, Arthur successfully retrieves them and delivers them to Monroe at the reservation. Under Dutch's directive, Arthur rendezvous with him and a group of Native Americans led by Peta and Eagle Flies. Dutch reveals their plan to trap soldiers in the canyon, intending to tar and feather them. However, Arthur discerns Dutch's exploitation of the Native Americans and tries to dissuade him from involving them. Despite Arthur's reservations, Dutch proceeds with the plan, prompting Arthur's reluctant participation. They rig dynamite near trees and await the soldiers' arrival. Upon detonating the explosives, the trees block the road, initiating the confrontation. Despite demanding surrender, the ambushers face overwhelming army reinforcements. Arthur, Dutch, and the Native Americans engage in a fierce battle, resulting in heavy casualties among the Native Americans. Forced to retreat, Arthur and Dutch flee to a cliff's edge, evading capture by leaping into the water below. After Eagle Flies' capture, a meeting is convened between Colonel Favors and Rains Fall. Arthur and Charles are invited to attend, with Arthur reluctantly agreeing at Charles' insistence. During the meeting, Arthur's coughing fit necessitates a temporary withdrawal to a tent. While inside, he overhears Favors' intention to execute Monroe, prompting him to prepare for imminent danger. Following the meeting's breakdown, Favors orders Monroe's arrest and announces his impending execution. Seizing the opportunity, Charles and Arthur launch an assault, liberate Monroe, and flee. Taking cover behind a rock, they engage in a prolonged battle against the army, ultimately emerging victorious before escorting the captain to Emerald Station. Charles and Arthur discover that Eagle Flies is being held captive at Fort Wallace and devise a plan to rescue him. They navigate across the river and approach the fort, opting to wait until nightfall to execute their mission. Under cover of darkness, they stealthily eliminate several sentries using bows, then scale the back wall with a rope. Dispatching more guards along the walls, they engage the army in combat, eventually breaching the wall where Eagle Flies is held. Upon freeing him, they create an exit by detonating a hole in the back wall before fleeing to canoes positioned along the riverbank. Despite encountering opposition from soldiers attempting to thwart their escape, they successfully evade capture, with Charles safely returning Eagle Flies to his father. Eagle Flies arrives at Beaver Hollow accompanied by a significant contingent of warriors from the reservation. He informs the gang that the army has raided their land and requests their aid in retaliating by destroying the Cornwall Company refinery. Rains Fall arrives soon after, pleading with his tribe to avoid descending into warfare. Despite his efforts, the warriors depart, leaving the gang behind. Following a brief deliberation, the majority of the gang opts to follow. Upon reaching the refinery, they witness the devastating aftermath of the conflict, with many Wapiti Indians having fallen. Arthur spots Eagle Flies amidst the chaos and organizes a rescue mission, dividing the gang into two groups. Leading one of their forces, Arthur successfully retrieves Eagle Flies and rendezvous with Dutch's group near the warehouse. They manage to secure the government bonds from within the warehouse, but Arthur is incapacitated when a pipe bursts, leaving him vulnerable. Dutch, abandoning Arthur, leaves him behind as more soldiers arrive. As Arthur faces imminent danger, Eagle Flies intervenes, eliminating the soldiers before succumbing to a fatal gunshot wound inflicted by Colonel Favors. In a desperate exchange, Arthur manages to eliminate Favors but is left severely weakened. After a confrontation with Dutch over his abandonment, Arthur, along with Charles and Peta, escorts Eagle Flies back to the reservation. Tragically, Eagle Flies passes away from his injuries upon their return. Arthur bids farewell to Charles, who stays behind to aid the tribe in evading the army. Subsequently, Arthur experiences another intense coughing fit and loses consciousness. Fortunately, he is discovered by the German family he'd aided earlier, who transport him to Annisburg, where he eventually regains consciousness. Dutch gathers the gang and reveals their plan for one final major heist before fleeing the country. They intend to rob an army train passing through Saint-Denis, carrying payroll and supplies for Bacchus Bridge repairs. Upon arriving in Saint-Denis, they recognize that the train bypasses the city, prompting them to give chase. Boarding the train, they face a relentless onslaught of enemies. Amidst the chaos, John sustains a gunshot wound to his left shoulder while detaching a burning train carriage. Dutch vows to rescue him, leaving Arthur to fend off the remaining soldiers and secure the loot. When Dutch returns, he delivers the devastating news of John's death, leaving Arthur in mourning. On their way back, they encounter Tilly, who informs them of Abigail's capture. Dutch and Micah decide to abandon her, but Arthur refuses to leave his friend behind. Teaming up with Sadie, they head to Van Horn, where Abigail is held captive. Arthur provides cover for Sadie as she battles through the town, but she's ultimately captured after reaching Abigail's location. Arthur fights his way to rescue her, eliminating the guards who ambushed. However, their triumph is short-lived as Agent Milton confronts Arthur, revealing Micah's betrayal and his collaboration with the Pinkertons since returning from Guarma. A struggle ensues between Arthur and Milton until Abigail intervenes, fatally shooting Milton and saving Arthur. Arthur escorts Abigail back to safety, urging her, Tilly, and Jack to depart with Sadie. Before parting ways, Abigail entrusts Arthur with the keys to Dutch's hidden money stash, revealing its location and bids him farewell. Arthur strides into camp and makes a shocking declaration, revealing Micah as the traitor. The tension escalates as both Micah and Arthur draw their weapons. Initially, the gang remains undecided until John arrives, accusing Dutch of abandoning him to die. Susan takes Arthur's side, threatening Micah with a shotgun. However, Javier's warning about the Pinkertons' imminent arrival distracts Susan, allowing Micah to fatally shoot her. Despite this, the majority of the gang rallies behind Dutch and Micah. As Pinkertons close in, Arthur and John narrowly escape through a cave. Arthur discloses Micah's betrayal to John and reassures him about the safety of his family at Copperhead Landing. With Dutch and the others in pursuit, Arthur urges John to seize his second chance and build a better life for himself and his family. Pursued into the woods, Arthur and John's horses are shot, forcing them to flee on foot after dispatching their Pinkerton assailants. Arthur faces a crucial decision: retrieve the money or aid John's escape. If Arthur helps John to escape, Arthur and John press onward towards the mountains, but Arthur decides to stay behind to divert the Pinkertons, handing over his hat and belongings to John. Reluctantly, John leaves as Arthur confronts Micah, resulting in a violent struggle that sends them tumbling from a ledge. They engage in a brutal fistfight, each sustaining severe injuries. Despite being pinned against a wall, Arthur manages to strike Micah with one of his revolvers before losing it. Determined to end Micah's treachery, Arthur crawls toward his fallen revolver only to be stopped by Dutch. He reiterates Micah's betrayal and his own sacrifices, emphasizing John's survival as the only redeeming outcome. As Micah retrieves another revolver, he urges Dutch to join him in pursuit of the money. Ultimately, Dutch walks away in disappointment, abandoning both Arthur and Micah to their fates. High honor. Following Dutch's departure, Micah storms away, leaving Arthur alone to face his fate. With great effort, he drags himself to the cliff's edge where he watches his last sunrise before passing away. Tuberculosis, coupled with his injuries and exhaustion, finally claim his life. Low honor. After Dutch's departure, Micah doesn't retreat, but rather advances towards Arthur, pointing a revolver at his head in a vengeful display. He asserts that Arthur isn't morally superior to him. In a callous act, Micah pulls the trigger, ending Arthur's life instantly with a gunshot to the forehead. He then laughs, spitting on Arthur's lifeless body, and departs. If Arthur goes back for the money. Arthur hands over his hat and possessions to John, instructing him to escape alone. Then Arthur fights his way back to the gang's camp, eventually locating the sack of money concealed in Dutch's chest within the cavern. Upon emerging from the caves, Micah unexpectedly assaults him, thrusting Arthur's knife into his side. After struggling to fend off Micah and retrieve his knife, Arthur finds himself facing Micah in a tense knife duel. High honor. After a fierce struggle, Arthur inflicts a deep slash across Micah's left eye, rendering it blind. Infuriated, Micah lunges at Arthur, attempting to stab him, but Arthur counters by biting Micah's hand and delivering a powerful punch to his face, forcing him away. Dutch intervenes to stop the fight, but upon Arthur's insistence that Micah betrayed the gang, Dutch opts to abandon both of them, despite Micah's denial of the accusation. Micah departs, taking the sack of money Arthur retrieved from the chest. Left alone to face his fate, Arthur witnesses the sunrise before finally succumbing to his tuberculosis, the initial stab wound, and exhaustion. Low honor. During the altercation, rather than slashing Micah's left eye, Arthur loses his footing and is forcefully brought down. In the scuffle, Micah seizes the opportunity to stab Arthur in the chest before Dutch intervenes to halt the brawl. Despite Arthur's repeated accusation against Micah as the betrayer, Dutch chooses to leave them both behind. As Arthur attempts to crawl away, Micah ominously advances with a knife, ultimately delivering a fatal blow to Arthur's back, ending his life. The circumstances surrounding Arthur's death dictate the imagery that follows. Under high honor, a deer enjoys the warmth of the sunlight, while under low honor, a coyote endures the rain. Accompanying this scene is the song Crash of Worlds by Rocco De Luca, its mood reflecting Arthur's honor level. Eventually, Charles Smith discovers Arthur's body and provides him a fitting burial in a serene spot, where he rests facing the setting sun, in accordance with his desires. This gravesite lies in Ambarino, northeast of Bacchus Bridge. Epilogue. Arthur's efforts to provide Marston with a fresh start yielded success when 8 years later, John and his family acquire land in Beecher's Hope, embracing a new life as ranchers. In the years following Arthur's passing, Mary is depicted visiting his grave, grieving his absence, either alongside an eagle or a coyote, determined by his level of honor. In 1907, John, Sadie, and Charles successfully locate Micah and his gang at Mount Hagen, achieving justice for Arthur's death. Micah meets his fate, slain jointly by John and Dutch for his treachery against the Vanderlint gang. Ironically, John's pursuit of Micah and vengeance for Arthur ultimately results in Edgar Ross kidnapping his family and John's own demise 4 years later. Upon achieving 100% completion, a brief cutscene unfolds where John pays a visit to Arthur's grave. In this scene, John is depicted finishing Arthur's journal, reflecting, "Guess we're just about done, my friend," before returning to regular gameplay. And that is the life of Arthur Morgan. So, what did you think? Did we cover everything? Is there anything we missed? What's your favorite Arthur Morgan moment? What's your least favorite? Did you go high or did you go low? Make sure you let us know down in the comments and subscribe to the leaderboard for more like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.